But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Hello, and...
Sorry, that happened again.
Oh my fucking god. Seriously?
No,
Seriously?
we got it. We got it.
All right. Okay. Oh, we got it. All right. Hello, and welcome to HoneyBadgerRadio. I'm your host, Alison Tiemann, and with me on the controls is Brian Martinez. That was not me this time, guys. It wasn't me. And today we're going to talk about... Are you done? Are you done fucking up? Are you done? Do you need a little more time? Okay, all right. Today we're going to talk about, is Jordan Peterson right about boys? And we're going to be referring to his interview with Tucker on Fox News tonight. But I completely blanked about the last name there, or if that's the first name.
It's Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson,
okay.
Yeah.
All right. And, I blame you. I blame you because I'm a woman.
Yeah. There you go. Women blame.
That's how we roll. That's how we roll. All right. So let's get started.
Okay, so before we do, those of you guys who are watching are probably thinking, why does Tucker Carlson have purple skin and the background is green? Well, because I've done some color alterations to protect us further from people doing copyright strikes, and it seemed to work well when we did the last one of these with Vice.com and Jordan Peterson as well as Joe Rogan. So we're going to keep going this route. It will give us some more protection, and maybe we'll be able to avoid the 20-second limit. So just the reasoning behind why things look like this.
We might be able to avoid the 20-second long banana.
Yeah, we may be able to avoid that. I mean, it worked last time. We didn't have any problems. So, here we go.
We might be skating on thin ice. And I just want to say that the reason why we're talking about these things and Jordan Peterson once again is because he's in the news talking about things related to the things that we talk about. It'd be nice if at some point these organizations and news people would start inviting people who research and talk about these issues all the time to talk about them. Not just, it is no problem because Jordan Peterson has lots of interesting things to say, but I don't think he has as much of a history of researching the problems facing men and boys as people like we do. And until that day comes, that individuals like Tucker Carlson go out of his way to actually invite people who talk about boys and men's issues on a regular basis to join him on his show, we will be discussing it third-party style.
Yep.
Gundam style. That's not third-party style, is it? No.
That's just all-party style. That's a whole country's party. South Korea represent. Okay, so let us... That was so 2014 or whenever that song came out. Let us dive in. And if you guys don't know who Tucker Carlson is, just look at his face, because that's like the thing he's known for, I think, the most is his expressions. All right.
Wait.
What?
I just remembered something. After show. If you want to join us for the after show, we will be covering How to Destroy a Man, a book called How to Destroy a Man that I received from Amazon. And we'll be reading that. Yeah,
the title is actually Destroy a Man Now, because it's the acronym. Like if you take the first letter of every word, it's damn. Destroy a Man Now is the name. Is the name of the book.
You want to join us and find out how to destroy a man now? Join us in the after show, www.patreon.com/HoneyBadgerRadio, and let's go. I'm done.
All right, let's do this.
Well, compared to the rates in the 80s and early 90s, crime overall is down in this country, but rampage shooters are increasingly common, and they're killing more people, obviously. Almost all of them are young men. The question, which for some reason very few people ask, but is the key question, is what's driving this surge in extreme antisocial violence? One man who's been thinking about it a lot is Jordan Peterson. He's a psychology professor at the University of Toronto, and he just spoke with us moments ago. Here it is.
I'm just pausing to... I played this bit because I felt it... I was thinking I could skip it, but I felt we should probably get the intro so that we know the motivation behind Tucker bringing Jordan Peterson on to talk about the boy cross and the context, exactly. So I went ahead and left it in. All right, so
I'm gonna hold my tongue. I'm gonna hold my tongue.
Okay, yeah, but well, because
I already have something I want to say.
Well,
yeah,
we'll go ahead and let's get into the thing, because I think Tucker is trying. He's a man that's trying to figure out what's going on, but I don't think he pretends to know. So,
Jordan Peterson, thanks for joining us tonight.
My pleasure.
We wanted to ask you the question that we think too few are asking, which is, why is this happening? Why are young men shooting up schools?
Because they're nihilistic and desperate.
All right, I paused it there. That was just one of the time codes. If you wanted to say anything to that, or if you want them to go a little bit deeper into the topic, because obviously this is just the initial response.
Well, it is sympathetic. Nihilistic and desperate. That's probably a fairly accurate assessment. I'd like to also point out that the rise in school shootings comes with a rise in another thing. For example, in Canada, I don't know if it's the same with the US, feminist-run government programs are going into middle schools and teaching boys to take responsibility for violence against women and girls. And what's really interesting about that is that this message is going to be uncritically delivered to boys who may be experiencing violence by women and girls against them. So it's a message that the violence that they experience is sort of irrelevant, but they need to take responsibility potentially for the victimization of the people who are victimizing them. That would tend to encourage a sense of nihilism in boys, I would imagine. Not to mention the message that if you succeed in a patriarchal society, it's because you were given something you didn't earn. And if you don't succeed, you are, of course, a loser, lives in his mom's basement, a neckbeard, mouth breather.
Yeah.
So
you're also a loser if you decide you don't want to compete at all. You just want to walk away.
Yeah.
And do your own
so
thing.
There's no real route to any kind of positive identity for young men that doesn't involve shaming. And if you shame every single possible option for a young man, why are you surprised when they embrace nihilism? Like, what do you think is going to happen? It's like there's no option for a young man to actually be relieved of the shame of being a young man. If he succeeds, it's because patriarchy gave it to him, and he took the very substance of the achievement out of the rightful hands of its rightful owner, which was a woman somewhere. And if he doesn't succeed, then he's useless. So nihilism seems like a sensible choice to me with those terms. Anyway, let's continue.
All right, let us continue.
How'd they get that way?
Well, I think life can make you that way unless you have a purpose and a destiny, let's say. I mean, there's no shortage of suffering and malevolence in life, and it's easy for people to become embittered by that. And if they don't see a way out, see a way forward, they get angry about it and turn against life itself. And they make a display of their hatred for being by massacring the innocent.
Okay, pausing again just for the banana.
I'm always, when I hear these conversations about young men and school shootings, a statistic always comes to mind. For the most part, for every one person that's killed by a young man, 20 young men have taken their own lives. And yet we don't really seem to have as much concern. We only care when these young men are killing other people's, and maybe that's the problem. That we only care. We only pay attention to them when they're killing someone else. Maybe that's the way that they have solved this conundrum. They can't be good. They can't choose any life path that doesn't lead to shaming. So they either kill themselves and just nobody cares. They just sort of fade into a ripple in time and are never remembered. Or they do something like this as an expression of society's disregard and are remembered. And it's, to me, I think the more important thing is for every the 17 people were killed in this shooting. That means we would be looking at about 240 people. 240 young men killed themselves. Killed themselves for these 17 people who were murdered by a young man. And yet we don't care about the 240 young men who killed themselves. It doesn't even register. I mean, can you imagine that?
Yeah.
That we just don't care? Like, there has been, 240 young men have killed themselves, and then this one young man killed 17 people. And then it's all across the media. All across the media. If you give a group of people, in this case young men, nothing to lose, don't complain when they act like they have nothing to lose. But at the same time, the only time we care and even notice them is when they kill, and not when they're killing themselves. And for the most part, you tell these young men, oh, you have absolutely no way to create a life in which you are recognized as having a positive effect on the world. You have no way. Because if you do succeed, we'll tell you that patriarchy gave it to you. If you don't succeed, we'll tell you that you're a failure. And if you walk away, we'll call you a horrible, misogynist woman hater for walking away. And there's no way that you are going to attain a positive identity in this cultural landscape. And the only way we're ever going to pay attention to you is if you kill someone. If you kill yourself, doesn't matter. It just goes in the memory hole. And we just forget about it. 240 young men killed themselves before one young man killed another person in this school shooting. But again, school shooting is the tragedy, and it is a tragedy. But the 240 young men who committed suicide that preceded this school shooting, this tragedy, nobody talks about. Nobody cares.
Yeah.
Anyway.
All right, moving on.
That's what's happening. And they write that.
They do write that. It's accelerating.
Yes.
The reserve of guns has, we've had semi-automatic rifles for 100 years, but we haven't had this number of school shootings. So the attitudes are changing, I think it's fair to say. Why
it's
are
also
more...
It's also kind of a psychological epidemic. These people keep track of each other, and there's a competitive element to it. And the fact that the media insists upon publicizing the names of these shooters is not helpful, because part of what drives them is motivation for notoriety, because notoriety is better than being ignored.
Yeah. Well, maybe we should be publicizing the names of the young men and having memorials to the young men killing themselves. Again, 20 young men will kill themselves before one kills another human being. One kills another human being. And we don't pay attention to that. I mean, at what point do we take responsibility for the nihilism? At what point do we take responsibility for what we're saying to young boys about their lives and about what they are to blame for? And I see Tucker sort of seems to be trying to get towards something. Like, why is it happening now? Why is the increase happening now? We've had these weapons for a century, and yet it's now that they're being used in this manner. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if let's see what Jordan Peterson has to say about the why now question. Okay.
Well, so what do you think about the media sort of, revealing the identity and talking a lot about the actual murderers in these mass shootings? Do you think that it's a bad idea to publish the name of the person who commits a crime like that?
Well, I think if you're giving young men no way of being noticed, that it doesn't involve shaming. Mm-hmm. And again, for the most part, the vast majority, 95% of young men will kill themselves before they'll kill another human being. So this is a tiny minority of the wash of pain that young men are feeling. But to publicize them, to give them that attention by killing others, I mean, if you spent your whole life basically screaming into a void, and you are the only option to actually be paid attention to, the only option to feel like you have any influence on the world at all is through violence, there's a huge tendency to take it. I mean, for the most part, like I said, the vast majority, 95% of these young men who are in this kind of a nihilistic situation where they feel there's no way out, there's no way to create a better world for themselves, they just kill themselves. They just blow their own heads off. There's only 1 out of 20 who will ever turn the gun on anyone but themselves. And what's really ironic is that we will take that 1 out of 20 and paint them as if they represent all young men, whereas the vast majority of those silently desperate young men who kill themselves, does the fact that we have put young men into this position of absolutely, there's no escape, there's no way for them to attain a positive identity in society, there's no way for it to happen, is that the fact that we've basically put them in this box, covered, like a box where acid is covering every side of it, we never account for that. Are we never to take responsibility for that, for what we're saying to them, leaving them to this sense of isolation in which only a very small fraction of them will ever act out violently towards anyone but themselves? Do we not take any responsibility for that? I think it's probably not the best idea to bring attention, to say, well, the only time we really care about young men is when they do something to someone else, when they act out their pain on another human being. That's the only time we really pay attention to you or care or anything. That's the only time you get to be heard, is when that happens. Maybe we should reconsider that. And reconsider putting young men in this acid-lined box in the first place, putting them in the position where suicide or homicide seems to make sense. And again, homicide will only make sense to 1 out of 20. From the vast majority, it'll be suicide. Maybe we should reconsider putting them in that position. And then we should also reconsider whether or not we want to give attention to the ones that hurt other people in that position, and only them, rather than giving attention to the ones who, out of desperation, just kill themselves. That's something to consider.
Yep. We got a super chat before I continue the video from Point Curation, who gave us $5 Canadian and says, "We can be a better society by being better individuals. We can be stronger by being patient, deliberate, productive. Young men and women can be more." Thank you, Point Curation.
I actually think that young men already are more. The fact is that, for the most part, most young men never engage in this kind of violence and even endure this situation without committing suicide. I mean, it's a testament to the inherent goodness of young men that the situation that they're being put in is not either absolutely destroying them or turning them all into incredibly angry, violent people. It's a testament to their peacefulness and their sense of duty that this hasn't happened. I mean, yeah, I don't know what would happen. I would hope that if women were put in the same situation, that they would respond with such nobility and such restraint and such endurance. But the fact that there are still young men going out, getting jobs, supporting families, supporting their relatives, making their way in the world, despite being heaped upon by these mountains of shame and this weight that they have to drag through their lives of shaming, despite all that, they're still being successful, is unfreaking unbelievably amazing. And it's, like I said, it's a testament to the sheer strength of will, perseverance, and tenacity of the average young man, that this hasn't completely crippled society and that they're still doing what they do. I would say that there is nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong in the response that young men are having towards society.
Yeah.
The problem is in what we're saying to them, and the fact that we're not allowing. We're putting that tenacity, that innate desire, that innate drive to want to serve and protect and provide, to its ultimate test. This ultimate test, and young men are still passing with flying colors. I don't actually see how we can point at young men and say, oh, they're failing. Society is failing to support them in achieving everything that they can. But even in the situation where society is putting them in a catch-22, in a no-win scenario, where they will be shamed if they succeed, they'll be shamed if they don't succeed, and they'll be shamed if they walk away, they are still carrying the weight of society. Literally. Young men are the reason why the West still has any kind of productivity, any kind of prosperity to speak of. They are the excess productivity that keeps the West in the position that it's in. They're the reason why we can run a government deficit, because everybody wants American debt. They're the reason why the hunger for the petrodollar exists, is because of that excess prosperity that young men bring to society. And they're still doing it, despite the fact that throughout school, they're given a harness and they're having weights shoved on them. And they're still walking. They're still doing it. I don't see anything. Like, seriously, there's nothing wrong with young men. They're still striving to achieve protection and provision of other people. They're still creating the productivity that we all rely on for our wealth and prosperity. They're still doing it. And they're doing it despite all of the people who are sitting on them. Like, literally, all of the women and the elders and everybody else who's literally being lifted up by the shoulders of the young men. They're doing that despite being spit on by everybody who's being lifted up by them. Being spit on and hit and shamed and cursed at. And they're still doing it. There is absolutely nothing that young men should be ashamed of for this. They should not take on the fact that some young men go completely nuts in this situation, and other young men kill themselves in this situation. In the situation that they're expected as a young man to allow the women around them to step onto their shoulders, to allow their elders to step onto their shoulders and sit down, and they are expected as young men to be able to stand and walk and run with a weight of the entire society on their shoulders, as they're being cursed and spit upon by the people they're carrying. And yet only a few of them ever go nuts, ever even kill themselves. This is like a testament to the sheer amount of willpower, tenacity, power, strength, grace, generosity of young men, that they still are doing this.
Yep.
And to be quite frank, they have nothing to be ashamed of. Absolutely nothing to be ashamed of. If you're a young man listening to this right now, and you're in a situation where you have been beaten down by this expectation that you basically lift all of society while society is spitting on you and shaming you, if you're a young man who's been beaten down by that, you shouldn't feel ashamed. You've survived it. And if you're a young man who's actually in a job, doing things like working on a railway line, doing plumbing, doing skilled trades, or even programming or anything, if you have survived, if you have managed to step up and lift all of society and yourself, you should get a freaking Purple Heart. Because it's an unbelievably amazing achievement. And I'm actually really freaking tired of listening to people point at young men and say they are the problem, when they are the ones who are giving us the prosperity that we enjoy, lifting everyone else up, even as they're spit upon. And that everybody's saying, oh, they're weak. The young men of this society are weak. They're lazy. They're selfish. They're immature. You get all of these statements And yet, of all of the generations of men that have preceded us, these young men are not just lifting society like the men have throughout since basically the Industrial Revolution, when the majority of women's productivity was taken over by mechanization. Not only are these young men lifting us up as a society and creating the prosperity that we enjoy, this generation of young men is doing so under the greatest level of weight, of shaming and hatred and blaming and sheer contempt expressed at them. So they're lifting the greatest emotional weight in human history. I'm amazed that anybody can see that and say they are the failure. But let's continue.
All right, well said. We got Serathis, who gives us 1,000 HUF, which is Hungarian forints. So Hungarian money. He says, how many SJWs would get an aneurysm from your average Married with Children episode? We should find out. Thank you for that bit of levity. And let us move on.
So what mistakes do you think we're making as a society to produce an ever-increasing number of young men like this?
That's a good question. I think we underestimate the necessity for young people to have clear direction and a sense of purpose in their life. They need something to offset the tragedy and malevolence of life. And we need to take these sorts of philosophical and even religious issues seriously, but we don't.
I don't think he's really answering Tucker's question, though. Why is it happening now? I mean, we've always existed with these existential crises as human beings. Why is this happening now? Why is this increasing now? And to be quite frank, the obvious answer is that we're not giving any young men any out or any path that leads to a positive identity in society. No matter what they do, it's negative. And at some point, there's going to be a percentage that shut down emotionally and they shut off emotionally. If society says to young men, you've got no positive way, you have no way of contributing positively to society. You have no way. You're an exile, an outsider. You're an enemy soldier within the citadel. You're a toxin, a disease. Mm-hmm. All you bring is ruin. If that's what society is going to say, if they're going to ostracize young men like that, this is what you will reap as a reward, as a harvest. And again, for the most part, these young men are just going to kill themselves. It's completely erroneous to focus on the one who doesn't and who kills someone else when you don't see that this is all, like the many suicides, 20 suicides for every one murder. That is the harvest of alienating young men and saying that there's no way that they can have a positive role in society. And like I said, I don't think this is, like, at this point in time, I don't think Jordan Peterson is answering his question, because I think what Tucker is asking is why now? And the answer is because patriarchy theory. And there's an even deeper answer underneath that. But the why now is because this is what we tell young men now. This generation of young men is the most shamed generation of young men in all of human history. And some of them are going to take that social isolation, and they're going to kill themselves, and a far, far, far smaller fraction are going to kill others. Anyway, yeah. Let's see if Peterson does answer the question.
Okay.
Do you think we're taking them less seriously than we used to?
Yes, definitely. I think that we talked in the past, we spoke much more about responsibility and responsibility in particular, but also purpose and maturity, and we valued those things highly. We didn't confuse them with tyranny and toxic masculinity, for example.
Just pausing it there. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, well, I mean, you haven't really been saying much at all, Brian. Is there anything that you wanted to add to that, or?
Well, I think that you pretty much said, you know, what I would have was thinking much better than I would have said it. I mean, the only thing I would add to that is, you know, the way that we're raising boys isn't helping either. I mean, you know, a large number are raised without fathers. A lot, then they're also they're usually abused by their mothers. Then they are shoved into some kind of a program where they're raised by women who are not their parents for, you know, the majority of their developing years. So they go from at home with their mothers, who tend to beat them, with a father tends not to be present or in the child's life for one reason or another. Then they go into daycare, where they're raised by more women who don't really have an interest in, you know, seeing them grow into full human beings, because they don't necessarily need to. Then they go into school, where most of the teachers are also female, and they don't know how to deal with boys, and so they just treat them like girls that are broken, and then they're medicated, and it just sort of, there's just all of this stuff that leads often to this point where you have this boy that's been shamed for what he is by people who don't know how to raise him, who have been essentially instructed to or forced to raise them for one reason or another. And then they put him on medicine to try to correct his behavior, which he believes is inherently wrong. And he learns everything he can about the world, usually through his peers who know about as much about the world as he does, which is to say not much at all. And it's no wonder that, you know, these sorts of things happen. It's actually a wonder that, you know, they manage to get, like, to what you were saying, they manage to make it to adulthood most of the time without killing anyone, much less themselves, despite all of that.
Well, the thing is that I think this is an additional request on young men, is that not only do they fulfill the needs of society for them to become the most productive class, and put their own needs subordinate to the needs of earning money, to the needs of serving institutions. I think one example of how we expect young men to serve institutions is something that Karen brought up with me, which was when Corey Feldman. Corey Feldman, yeah, who was trying to bring attention to the sexual abuse of children in Hollywood. When he was talking about this to Barbara Walter as a victim of that sexual abuse, she said to him, what gives you the right to challenge the institution of Hollywood? What gives a young abused man or boy the right to put his abuse and recognition of his abuse over the benefit and the well-being of the institution that he's part of? This is the sex role that we expect young men to occupy, not to put their own wealth, their own health and well-being ahead of the companies and institutions that they serve, or the families that they're part of. That's the role. I mean, Barbara Walters clearly illustrated it, and that even when a young man is sexually abused, he should still put the health of the institution he's a part of ahead of getting retribution or justice for the abuse that he's experienced. Mm-hmm. It's very clear in that, and that we expect young men to put their health and well-being last. But at the same time, we add an additional burden on young men, an additional psychological burden on young men, which is sort of represented with what's happening now, that young men act in the same way as young women, that they be able to take care of themselves as young women are able to take care of themselves, at the same time as we expect them to be able to not take care of themselves in service of something greater than themselves. So it's just another expectation on young men that they not only occupy these positions in which they are serving the institution at the detriment to themselves, but also that they act like young women act. And yeah, it's an impossible request. It's absolutely an impossible request. You can't simultaneously ask young men to sacrifice themselves and not sacrifice themselves. It's impossible. It's just another way. It's just another expectation that's being heaped on young men, that they do the service that, and the funny thing is, a boy means servant. And man is just a suffix that means does the thing that is the prefix, like fireman, statesman. It's a gender neutral suffix. It may not be used anymore in that way, but it was originally a gender neutral suffix. So that's right in the role of a boy to serve and a man to seek his value in doing something. That's his value. And if he's not doing it, he has no value. And you can't simultaneously put that kind of psychological pressure on a group of people, men, and then also expect them to be able to take care of themselves to the same degree women do. It just doesn't work. And this is what we're seeing the result of. And I actually disagree with Jordan Peterson, because I don't think he's really getting to the heart of the matter here. I don't think he's uncovering why it's happening now. I think the reason why it's happening now is that we are shaming the crap out of young men, and they're giving them no out, and we're heaping more expectations on them. That they simultaneously be the group of people that sacrifices for the institutions they serve, and also able to put their own needs first, so nobody has to pay attention to them. That's the funny thing. I don't know if anybody's...
All while taking the blame for everything that's wrong with the world.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And the funny thing is, I don't see a lack of the expectation that young men grow up anywhere. I don't see that. I really honestly think that this is a result of our lack of expectation that young women grow up. And I know everybody's been like, oh, but it's the young men who are shooting things up. And well, it's because we put such incredible pressure on them. And once again, how can you possibly look at the minority that hurts others and ignore the majority that just kills themselves and say the minority is the defining feature, is the defining fact of all of this? And it is, I think what has happened, and at the end of the day, what's happened is that, unlike most of human history, we have put the entire weight of the world on young men's shoulders. 100 years ago, 200 years ago, prior to Industrial Revolution, prior to windmills grinding grain, a huge amount of the productivity of the human race rested not just on men, but also on women. It was a much more equally shared burden. And now it all rests on young men. If we took young men out of the equation tomorrow, the U.S. would be flattened. It would spiral into a third world nation instantaneously overnight. If we took young women out, we might have a bit of a problem because we don't have the consumer body, but it would be a much better problem to have than not having the productive body.
Yeah.
And it's like, if we're going to do this, if we're going to put the weight of the world on young men's shoulders, don't be surprised when you get some of them, a very, 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 very small number of them, go nuts and just can't handle the pressure. And then a much larger of them go just implode silently and kill themselves. I mean, it's obvious to me. And it just doesn't seem to be obvious to other people. And like I said, I disagree highly with Jordan Peterson. I don't think young men are not receiving the message that they need to grow up. They are receiving it. The problem is that grow up into what? Into another cog in the patriarchal engine that supposedly grinds women to dust? Grow up and oppress the group of people that you want to help and save? I mean, if you want to shut young men down completely, tell them that. Tell them that everything they do is just a function of patriarchy that will further endeavor to harm and hurt and cause pain to women.
Well,
okay.
To be fair to Peterson, he does extrapolate more, so we're going to get a little bit more context. And of course, we know, guys, that he's stood up for men in other interviews and podcasts, and this is just a 6-minute thing with Tucker Carlson. But let's see what else is said. Let's put it that way.
Are we getting some pushback in the commentary?
Some, but I mean, there's some people that are just like, well, I've heard Peterson talk about that kind of stuff before in other areas. So, but this is the most recent interview, as far as I know, because it was after the recent shooting. So, but there is more to this as well. But before I go and play more of the video, let me read some super chats. Ginger Socrates gives us $10 and says, Alison, I really needed that speech. This is reference to the previous one, not the one we just had. Life has been hell, and I'm working 80 to 100 hours a week to better my life. I'm at work right now, and I was feeling very depressed, but your words make me feel valuable. And Zaranx gives us $10 and says, Alison, this stream is unnecessary. We know that men raise themselves. The idea that boys and men acting out are because of lack of fathers or role models is enough for society to roll their eyes. / sardonic. So he's just being cynical. But he's self-aware. So I guess it's a little dark humor. I don't know.
Most likely, yeah.
Yeah, sarcasm. All right, moving on.
Speaking of toxic men, why is it all boys?
Well, boys are more aggressive than girls, and there's a biological component to that that's quite strong. That's why the vast majority of people in prison are male. Like on average, there's not much difference in aggression between men and women. If you picked a random woman and a random man out of the population and you had to bet on who was the most aggressive, if you bet it was the woman, you'd be right 40% of the time. But if you take the 1 in 100 most aggressive people, and those would be the people in prison, they're all men, or virtually all men. It's also why males attempt suicide less frequently, but they commit it successfully much more frequently. They're much more likely to use lethal means.
Okay, and just a second. I've actually seen an analysis of the numbers on prison, taking into account the sentencing gap between men and women. And it's entirely likely that the differential between aggressive criminals is due to the sentencing gap. We don't know for sure. You can't know for sure. But that's the thing. We can't know for sure. And the fact that women's aggression is seen as less serious when, for studies on witness testimony has found that people who witness equally violent male and female criminals will regard the woman's violence as less severe over time, even though they were equally violent. So we have this sort of soft peddling of women's violence happening all the time in society. And it's almost like an unconscious thing that we do. And then we have also the fact that the sentencing gap has to be accounted for when we're talking about the differential in violent criminals in actual prisons. Mm-hmm. And I know what he's talking about when he says that 40% of the time it would be the woman that might be more violent. He's referring to domestic violence studies that find that, at least in Canada, and they're all over the map. There are some domestic violence studies that find that women are more violent and some men are more violent. And it all depends in part on what window you're looking at. When you're looking at a smaller window, which is statistically more accurate, you will find equal amounts of violence between men and women, if not favoring women. But if you look at a longer window, once again, that whole effect of soft peddling women's violence has time to have applied itself to that longer window of memory. So people remember women as being less violent than they were. And so they sort of drop off. They sort of fade into the haze of forgetfulness. And we don't remember the full sum total of women's violence. Mm-hmm. So saying that men are more violent, I'm not sure if that's completely accurate, especially since testosterone tends to not actually be associated with violence. Estrogen does. Reason why weightlifters are said to have roid rage is because the testosterone, the excess testosterone, is being converted into estrogen in their brains. That's also why they get quote unquote bitch tits. So it's like this is not this statement. I have to take issue with it. I do not think I don't think it's scientifically sound. I think there's enough here that you can put question into the reason why this is happening is that boys are more aggressive. And furthermore, once again, the issue of timing isn't being addressed. Tucker is asking, why now? Young men don't have more testosterone now than they did 50 years ago.
They have less.
So they have less. So that can't really be, well, it could, because they have less. And once again, the estrogen is the aggressive hormone.
There's more estrogen in men too,
yeah,
right? And women.
So that might actually be it, but I don't think that's where he's going with this.
I also want to throw something else in there that's not entirely related to this, but it's not about Jordan Peterson, but rather Jesse Lee Peterson, the Reverend black man. I think you did an interview with him once.
Yes, I did an interview with him.
I've seen a couple of his videos, and I remember in one he was talking about how, and maybe you can give me your thoughts on this, because I know that he's a reverend and not a he's not a scientist or anything like that. But he was talking about how he thinks, or he believes, that male aggression that we're seeing, that the violence, the gang violence, and all this sort of stuff that happens, it's actually men behaving in what he calls a feminine way, where they're more likely to lash out and react emotionally and essentially become violent. He believes that is actually something that is learned from being raised by a single mother and being surrounded by women all the time. But it just so happens that it's taking place in the body of a man as opposed to the body of a woman. So it's something that people take far more notice of and take far more seriously.
Well, I suppose the studies that find that lesbian couples are the most violent would tend to corroborate that. I don't really know if that's the case. I would say that emotionality is more of a child thing than necessarily a female thing.
Yeah.
As I suspect that a lot of women's emotional displays are, in fact, tools.
Yeah, I think about that too,
ends.
because it's like, there is a conflation between masculinity and maturity, and then obviously by contrast, femininity and immaturity.
Well, yeah. The thing is that the word girl originally meant a child of both sexes, and now it's only applied to the female child, while the word servant was applied to the male child. It's the idea that women, an aspect of femininity is also immaturity. It's pretty baked into our ideas about masculinity and femininity. So I'm not sure if I can disentangle that, because I'm pretty sure that, if you looked at women 300 years ago, a lot of this behavior wouldn't be female, wouldn't be feminine, because they were doing the necessary work to keep their communities alive. Yeah. I mean, if you're the person who's making sure that the crops get off in time, making sure that they're stored properly so they don't generate forms of mold that'll kill everyone, making sure that people get the food that they need to survive through winter, making sure the medicine is there, making sure everybody has water, making sure everybody has heating, making sure that the food is processed properly. I mean, if you're the person making all of these calculations and decisions, you're not going to be the person that people want to be the one throwing shit fits and tantrums and being unable to deal with pressure. And in peasant societies, women are the ones making those decisions. Mm-hmm. So I imagine that the way we would have expected women to be, even in the 50s, if you look at the auxiliary female Army Corps and stuff, those women looked like they knew what the hell they were doing. And they had expectations placed on them that they control their emotions and be responsible. And I think that maybe the idea that childhood and immaturity is associated with women is something that's very modern, and it's contemporary with the fact that our society for the last 2.5 millennia has been focused on reducing women's labor. I'm sort of going really far afield here, so maybe pull me back. I don't know. Okay.
Yeah, I got more super chats that have come in, so. All right, so we got some super chats. I'm going to read them. Jeremy Rainman gives us $50. Thank you, Jeremy. That's very generous. And writes, Jordan Peterson is a very, very smart man who married his grade school sweetheart. He does not understand what young men face trying to negotiate marriage and reproductive success in today's Western world, where women have all sexual and social power. Zeranx gives us $10 and says, Brian, years ago I read a Psychology Today article that took a look at very young children to see how rough they are closer to infants. The boys were more docile and the girls turned out to be more violent. And Anthony Durrell gives us $5 Australian and says, female children were called gay girls. Eve Ensler is working on a time machine as we speak.
No! Keep her away from Gamergate's time machine.
Yeah.
We don't want Eve Ensler. We don't want the snake in the grass here.
Somebody warn Elon Musk. Eve Ensler is coming. All right. So let us continue.
And there's a very powerful biological component to that, despite what the postmodern social constructionists have to say about it. But they've got their head firmly buried in the sand. So.
Oh, shoot. I guess I'm a postmodernist. I think that there are significant differences between men and women, but I don't think that aggression favoring men is one of them. Mm-hmm. I don't think the science is necessarily there from what I've seen. And the association with aggression and testosterone, the fact that we really can't genuinely extrapolate anything from the incarceration rates when we're dealing with a 60% differential in incarceration between men and women. Like I said, I've seen an analysis, amateur analysis, not one done by a scientist, but one that suggested that when you account for the sentencing gap, the differential between criminal, like you would have 50-50 men and women as criminals if the sentencing gap wasn't there, essentially. Mm-hmm. So it's like all of these are not really solid places to put this idea that men are more aggressive. Men are more capable of doing damage when they're aggressive, for sure, because they're bigger and stronger. But for the most part, I don't think that they're necessarily more aggressive, and it does depend on the measure and hormone. That it's not supported in terms of hormonal studies either. Testosterone doesn't make people aggressive. It makes men pro-socially competitive. What that means is that they will compete for positive status within a group. So more testosterone makes you compete for positive status. So a young man with high testosterone would want to compete in a way that improves his stature, not in a violent way or a way that is considered antisocial, but in a pro-social way, in a way that people will admire him for and consider him to be a valuable member of the community and also to be a just and moral member of the community. So that's what testosterone does. I don't think estrogen doesn't seem to have the same quality. It's and again, the studies on estrogen I think are pretty new as well, so you can't really say for sure that estrogen is associated with aggression, but you know there is so really it's hard to say firmly what's going on here is what I'm getting at. I think that it's very early to say for sure that estrogen is associated with aggression, and for sure that if we held the differential in imprisoning constant, we got rid of that both men and women would be imprisoned equally. So take what I'm saying with a grain of salt.
Yeah, well, it's definitely something that should be looked into, basically.
But take what
it's not.
Professor Peterson is saying here with a grain of salt as well. Mm-hmm. Okay.
I mean, yeah, I think even Peterson himself would agree with that. All right. We got some more super chats. Well, one more. Silver Icetail gives us 100 Norwegian crowns and writes, here is 100 Norwegian crowns. I want the aerodynamic doggo to say out loud, there is no bone, in his best doggo voice. Also, first donation to HBR. Keep on keeping on, heart. Well, thank you, Silver Icetail. I don't know what a doggo voice is, but there is no bone. I was just trying to do like a Keanu Reeves thing. There is no bone. Whoa. Thank you. All right, moving on. I already feel awkward enough as it is.
Given that we know that boys are the ones, if there is a school shooting, who are going to be the ones committing it overwhelmingly, shouldn't we be thinking about how to raise our boys in a way that they're less likely to do this?
Yeah, I think we should be thinking about that. I mean, the book I published here, this 12 Rules for Life, is a meditation on exactly that. I've been lecturing online about the idea that responsibility is what gives life meaning, and that meaning is the antidote to the sort of nihilism and aggression and resentment that can otherwise be produced. I mean, there's no doubt that life is difficult.
I think there's something being omitted in this analysis. First of all, once again, I think that boys are expected to grow up to a standard of responsibility. It's right in the name. Boy is servant. Man is somebody who takes an identity, a positive identity, from an action in society that he fulfills, so a service to society. What I think is the problem is that what we're seeing is the effect of shaming young men's identity to such a degree where there is no positive route for them to exit and become a productive member of society. You look in the 50s, becoming a pillar of society was an important role for young men, to become the businessman who goes to church on Sunday and gives to the poor and is a productive moral member of society. And if he attained that, he would be respected as a productive moral member of society. Now what happens? He is an agent of the patriarchy, who is complicit in the oppression of women, and he most likely took away a woman's access to being part of the business that he's part of. And he took it away from her. He stole it from her teary eyes and just destroyed her in order to get what he wanted. So there's just this.
I think Peterson is like he wants to give young men a purpose. He thinks that the nihilism is the problem, and maybe if they have a purpose that would give them, the path that they need to find a reason to exist, to continue. But I guess what you're saying is that what's missing from the equation, or at least he hasn't mentioned it yet, is the strong opposition to men finding a purpose. Like if men were to try to get together and look for something to move towards as a group, then they will not do so without resistance. We know that this is something that is expected of them. And I think that one of the reasons why men persevere despite the resistance is that they want that. They want a purpose. They want to do, they want to find a path. They want to be heroes, for lack of a better term. But the problem is the shaming and the resistance and the fact that there are people who don't even understand them, that are supposedly around them, that raise them, that are supposed to be developing them and preparing them, but they don't know the half of it, and they don't care, and they actually resent them for existing.
Well, think about it. If society said, okay, young men, this is what you do to earn a positive identity. This is what you do to earn your positive male identity. This specific thing is what you do to earn your positive male identity. It's not something women can do. Only you can do it. If anyone in society was saying that, what would we say about them? We would say that they were sexist and exclusionary towards women. So there is absolutely no place where we can even have that positive male identity that's just for young men. That you can do this or you can be this, and this is yours. This is your positive male identity. And women can't do or be it because it's yours. We can't say that in society. Nobody in society can say that. Well, I can, because I'm a perverse, stubborn, hateful, angry, aggressive person. And I will do what the fuck ever, I'll say and do whatever the fuck I want. But for the most part, you can't say or do that. You can't say, hey, young men, this is where you can be, and it's yours. It's all yours. Women can't go in there and take it from you. They can't take this action from you, because it is yours. This is how you, as a young man, develop a positive identity, and women can't have it. You can't say that in polite society anymore. The nihilism comes from that. Nihilism comes from the fact that in our society, men can't have anything of their own. They can't have any action of their own. They can't have any job of their own. They can't have any use of their own. It all has to be made available to women. And when you're dealing with a group of people who need to differentiate themselves in order to feel like they've developed a unique value, where the value itself is so tied to their gender identity, you're creating a situation where they have nothing to themselves, nothing to them that they can actually call their own. And that, I mean, unless you give young men something, some way of entering a world where they can develop that positive value that is their own, that's just theirs, own. And you can't do that because it's sexist. It's woman hating. It's patriarchal. It's rape culture. It's exclusionary. It's horrible. It's the worst thing you could possibly. It's a sin.
Mm-hmm. It's
a destructive sin to even contemplate such a thing. To give young men their own value that they can develop. Absolutely. That's just Satan talk. And that's where the nihilism is coming from. If you can't have any way of developing value as a young man, what are you going to do? I mean, you can keep telling them, yeah, be responsible, be et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you're not going to solve the problem of the nihilism. The problem of the nihilism is that they do not have an identity of their own that they can achieve. It's as simple as that.
Yep. All right, we have some more super chats.
So it sounds like you're making, like you're something's going on in where you are.
Oh, like, is it a clickety-clack sound? I'm sorry if that's distracting. That's my dog playing with his bone. I gave it to him specifically so he wouldn't annoy us during the stream. So, but he's like dragging it across the floor. Let me close the door. Thank you. Okay.
Sorry, doggo. Sorry. We can't let you be a dog in here.
He's one of those. What he likes to do is, and I don't want to distract too much, but what he likes to do is, if you give him a toy, okay, specifically so that he leaves you alone, but you figure he'll just play with his toy or eat his bone, or his bully stick or whatever. You would think that he would take it and then go off on his own and play or chew or whatever. But what he does is he plays and chews, but he does it really close by and loudly. It's almost like he wants you to play with him, but he doesn't know how to tell you directly. So instead, he just plays loudly nearby. It's kind of like a little kid that wants you to play with him. And so if you say, no, I can't right now, I got to do something else, or you're trying to focus on some other task, and he starts playing loudly nearby, like, oh my God, this would be so much fun if somebody else was playing, So that's what he does. It's hilarious. Anyway.
But I actually, before we get into the super chats, if there are any,
yeah, there are.
I had a thought, so I'm going to lay it on you. Okay. What is the one thing our society says is exclusively male?
School shootings.
I think we've discovered school shootings and aggression.
Yeah.
And then we stand back and we essentially say to young men, you have rape.
Yeah.
You have absolutely no unique male identity, which is something that every human being wants. They all want a positive identity, and there's a huge amount of desire. Like, all of our sexual mentation is behind the desire for a positive gender identity based on our sex. So there's a huge amount of passion that we want to have our own unique gender identity. And that's going to be in young men. And what does our society say is uniquely male? Aggression and school shootings. So what do you think's going to happen?
Yeah, really.
Yeah. Like,
I mean, you basically don't allow men an outlet anywhere else, because if you any other outlets or any other things that men or boys take an interest in, feminists want to shame it, and women want to get involved, and they want to change everything. So boys eventually get pushed out of the thing that they're interested in. And the only area where women don't seem to have an interest in competing with them or changing, and so that they can be included in it, are things like aggression and school shootings. So I guess those are the areas where men can do whatever they want, you know, and suicide. I mean, they
well, of course they can't do whatever they want because this is bad. But if the only thing you're gonna give young men as an identity for them, like that, the only thing that you say defines men is aggression. I mean, this is feminists would say that's toxic masculinity, that's patriarchy. You define aggression as being that's exactly what feminists are doing. You're defining aggression as male. And you're surprised. You're taking out every other avenue for young men to attain a positive gender identity, and the only way they can differentiate themselves, and this is just a huge compulsion to differentiate yourself. Most of them will just kill themselves because they can't attain this self-actualization, which is so critical to just being comfortable in your own skin, is having a sense of a positive identity. They'll just kill themselves. And some of them will say, okay, yeah, you told me all my life that aggression is the only way I can differentiate myself as a man and have any value. And it is a negative value, but you are giving them value by giving them attention, by splashing their name everywhere. You've told me my whole life the only way that I can attain value is by being aggressive towards others. What do you think's going to happen? All right.
Super chats. Super duper chats. Zeranx gives us $5 and says, Peterson has said it before in his classes that the benevolent father/wise king provides encouragement that young men need. Unfortunately, unsaid here. And the Spence Fencer gives us $2 and says, dang it, Brian, men can't do anything right. No, we're really great at suicide. We're way better than women. I'm waiting for the suicide gap complaint article to be written by Jezebel to come out. Why aren't women? Why are men killing themselves so much? Let women catch up.
They already
parity.
They already has. No, seriously. They think that they're saying because women care more about other people, they commit suicide less. So suicide gap is actually it's actually a result of emotional labor that women do.
God. Fucking believable.
I know it is. It's the suicide gap is the result of women's emotional labor. It's unbelievable. You're right. And the other thing is that the suicide gap, if you include successful attempts with unsuccessful attempts, men attempt suicide more often. It's just that they exclude the successful attempts. And the other thing is that men also don't, when they are practicing suicide, they're less likely to come to the attention of the authorities. So the thing is that when you practice suicide with a gun, you essentially just go through the process of almost pulling the trigger. Well, when you practice suicide with a bottle of pills, you're going to probably are more likely to come to the attention of the authorities. Not to mention people are keeping an eye out more for women in these scenarios. So the fact is it's another statement saying that women attempt more often. It's incorrect. When you include completed and attempted, men do it more. And the other thing is that men do not come to the attention of the authorities as often when they are suicidal. So we're not going to capture as many attempts by men. Yeah. So again, this is I think is being overstated. All right, let's shall we continue? Let's see what else.
Well, there's two other super chats, but on what you were saying, well, let me just get through these real quick. Lise Maxwell gives us £5 and says, get all the lunatics and sit them down to a bloody good game of Dungeons and Dragons. Solved. It's actually funny that you bring that up. I've seen some videos of where there are guys, there was one guy specifically, but this is actually a very popular thing in prison. There's a guy who runs Dungeons and Dragons for the inmates there. And it actually turns out to be a really good bonding exercise for them. And they also, it's a good outlet. And it's very constructive, and they take interest in lots of other things as a result. So, and the best part is, if you're playing D&D in prison, there's no woman that's going to join your game and start fucking with all the rules. So you can, it's probably the only place where you can play D&D without women.
I could just hear the screaming. And that's the point. It's like any time where men try to assert themselves and say, we want something for ourselves, you'll hear people say that that's not acceptable. And, you know, and I can actually hear the MGTOW saying, well, what the hell? You're part of the men's rights movement. Couldn't you just... And it's like, yeah, I know. I am taking part in the men's rights movement. I'm not going to call myself a woman going her own way or anything like that. I draw the line there. Not going to try to take over or speak for MGTOW. But I think that for me, with the men's rights movement, there are things that I get from it as a woman that I wouldn't get anywhere else. And I really value that. So, and I want to see men have their own way of attaining manhood and having their own methods. Or even if we could recognize the fact that fatherhood or other aspects of the male, like human men, what makes us human, as being how young men attain a positive identity, that would be good. But in order to do that, we would have to very much respect fatherhood. We'd have to put it into law. And we'd have to say that children have a right to their fathers as much as they do their mothers. And it's a complicated thing, and that's just a bit of drivel that I dribbled.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Spence Fencer gives us $2 and says, as long as they only shoot other men, it's all good. Well, yeah, of course, because when there's a school shooting, we have to focus on the men who shot, not the men who were shot. But we've talked about that at length already. All right, moving on.
I mean, there's no doubt that life is difficult and that people get hurt and betrayed. That's unassailable truth. You need something to offset that. And most people find that in their destiny, in their adoption of responsibility, and their willingness to make their own lives better and the lives of their families better, and to contribute to the community and to bear the burden of being nobly. And that works. But we don't think that way anymore.
You mentioned the...
All right. No, I think they're going to get into why this is, people don't think that way anymore. But we'll see. I'm going to go back.
Well, I just wanted to, because we're getting close to the end of this, and I want to get through it.
Yeah, for sure. Because we're all an hour and 15 minutes into the show too.
If my conjecture is right, and this is original thinking, that women really govern how men's identities play out in the greater world. So we sort of govern the definition. Then what's happening here is we've created a definition that doesn't allow young men any space to exist as young men. And there's no way that we're going to solve this problem without engaging women's responsibility to society and young men as the ones who define the relationship between young men and society. Like there's no way we're going to solve that until women take responsibility for that aspect of their role. Mm-hmm. And again, this is original thinking to me. It doesn't matter if we are trying to appeal, like Tucker and Jordan Peterson can say it's about the decline in masculine expectations of responsibility. But I don't think it is. There still is a huge expectation of responsibility on young men. I really think it is that women, specifically women, have created a situation in which they have defined young men's identity in such a way that they have nothing to themselves. So there's nothing that they can look at and say, this, if I do this, I am a man, and I can take pride in my gender identity. There's nothing that women will say, well, I'll take my hands off that. I'll give that to men as being something that they can do and achieve and become that will give them a positive sense of their masculinity. Nor do we recognize the expression of natural maleness and providing and protection and providing for women, and to protecting and providing for their children, raising their children, in particular, raising their children. We don't recognize that as being something uniquely male that needs to be protected by law and social opinion. So I don't think that saying we need more masculinity is going to solve this crisis. I think what we're lacking is a responsible adult femininity that says, okay, this is what men need. We should endeavor to give that to them, not just because it's what's good for society. Young men are not going to continue to be this productive at this level of inducing nihilism. This identity that we've constructed is, its primary purpose seems to be inducing nihilism in young men. And we can't continue along this route of inducing more and more and more nihilism in young men until we are eventually going to come to a breaking point. And yes, we should stop doing this. As women, we should stop defining young men in this way. We should start protecting their right to have their own identity, start protecting them taking a positive identity from natural aspects of their masculinity. Not just because our society is going to implode if we don't. Eventually, we are going to destroy young men's productivity, and then we are going to spiral into a third world hellhole, if not worse, into a pre-Stone Age society, if not worse, because we lose the petrodollar, which is the one organizing facet of our society that still exists, but also because it's what's fair and just and compassionate and kind. It's what you do when you see yourself in a position of having power over another human being, and that they have a vulnerability to you, is that you take responsibility for using that power to minimize their vulnerability and do the best that you can by them. And that is that conversation has to happen among women. This has to happen among, there's no increase in masculinity. There's no decline in masculinity that's going to solve the fact that women are defining men's identity in such a way that they're inducing nihilism and hatred and self-hatred and suicide and homicide and all of these other things. This is an incredible power that women have, and they are not using it in a positive way. And to me, when I say that, I think, wow, that's amazing. Like, yes, this power has been used in a negative way, but it can be used in a positive way too. We can take responsibility. We can be adult. We can assume this expectation of taking responsibility for these vulnerabilities that these young men have and do right by them. And maybe out of the bargain, we will understand more about what it is to be human and be able to do more as humans. But, you know, I like I said, I don't think that saying we need more responsibility from young men is really going to solve this problem.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Let me see if there's any other super chats real quick. Nope. Nothing new. Let us continue.
You mentioned the toxic masculinity. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but I've heard the phrase a lot. What does it mean in our public conversation when someone attributes the shooting to toxic masculinity?
Well, it's an attempt to smear the idea of masculinity by confusing masculine competence with tyranny. And it's part of the underlying idea that our culture is a corrupt, tyrannical patriarchy that was run by men for the advantage of men, which is a very pathological way of looking at the world.
I'm just pausing it for the banana.
Yay! Okay,
Yeah.
I'm giving him props for this.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm glad Tucker asked him that, because he's had on guests in the past, feminist guests, that would talk about toxic masculinity, and Tucker didn't know what it meant, and he had trouble getting them to give him a straight answer because, of course, you know, they wouldn't just blatantly come out and say men are the problem. So instead they would say, I love men, but toxic masculinity. And he'd be like, well, what are you talking about? I don't understand this. So he asked someone who's going to give him basically as straight an answer as they could. Zhang,
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah. You know what toxic masculinity, actually the definition is? I control your identity. That's the definition of toxic masculinity. When a woman starts talking about, or a man starts talking about toxic masculinity, just replace the word toxic masculinity with I control your identity. I'm the one in power over your identity. and then it makes complete sense. Because you're right, toxic masculinity, you can't pin them down on a definition of what it means. It essentially means I'm the one who determines what behaviors you're allowed to engage in order to have a positive social identity. So it's basically just saying I have control over your identity.
Yep. Xerinx gives us $10 and says, if we're to wait for women to become accountable and bear responsibility to steer boys in positive ways, we should accept the coming end. Too few women will do it or teach girls to do it.
Well, then it's the end. Like, there's nothing more you can say to it. But I would rather go to the end actually trying to make it better.
I mean,
go to the end.
If what he's saying is true, then we have nothing to lose.
Yeah, so there's nothing to lose. Like,
yeah,
we might as well try. And at what point, like, and maybe this is because I have some distorted thinking from being bombed when I was a kid and going through the process of not knowing if I'm going to live the next day. But at some point, you got to just let go of that. Let go of caring if this is the end or not, and just try to do what you can to make it better. And just life goes on. Yeah. This could be the end of Western civilization. Yeah, tomorrow we could be experiencing a nuclear holocaust. Yeah, all of these horrible things. There are no certainties in the world. The only certainties are the ones you create and the ones you decide to build towards. And if it is going to be the end, if Western civilization is destined to end, then I'm going to go out having done everything I could to understand myself, understand my society, and bring about a positive outcome. Then go out shut down and seeped in nihilism.
Yeah. There you go. Xerinx, $5 again. He just gave the last one. He says, just for the record, I wasn't making a nihilist statement, just speaking factually. Okay.
Okay. All right. Shall we continue?
All right, let's move on. Yep.
But a very common one. And if that description is accepted, then it means that masculine energy, so to speak, whether it's manifested by women or by men, that masculine energy does nothing but prop up the tyranny of the patriarchy, and so should not be fostered. And the only people who think that way are women whose relationships with men have been extraordinarily damaged, or men who have no idea who they are, or who are trying to shirk responsibility. The idea that masculinity...
I actually disagree. I think the women who think that way are the ones who want to have control over men. And at the same time as they don't want to acknowledge that they do. Because I know, listening to this stream, I can imagine a feminist listening to this stream and saying, women don't have that kind of control over men's identity. And then immediately turning around and saying, what you're doing is toxic masculinity and you should stop. You should stop it right now. And it's like, well, what are you appealing to when you're saying, I get to judge this man's behavior if you don't have control over their identity? I mean, if you don't, you're not going to get anywhere with that. He's going to simply say, yeah, no. And you would have never gotten anywhere with that. Feminism would have gone nowhere if women didn't control men's identity. It's as simple as that. And the fact that it did is evidence of the truth of my statement. I don't think only women who have bad relationships with men enjoy the exercise of power over men. I think a lot of women do. I think it's not just feminists who do this. I've seen it in female relatives who will use these narratives that feminists have put out in order to control and cow and dominate men. And that's, I think, the principal reason why these feminist narratives exist. They don't exist because they're the truth. They exist because they are tools of control over men's identities. And they don't actually make sense as the truth, because there's no point appealing to a system that loathes you and saying, I'm a victim of you, save me. Well, the system will be like, well, patriarchy would be like, well, patriarchy's working the way it should. Thank you for that information, lady. I'm glad we've ascertained that there's nothing we have to do to save you, because our patriarchy is working the way it should be working. You know, in a patriarchy, in a true patriarchy, feminism would be quality assurance. You'd raise a feminist concern, and a true patriarchy would say, thank you, ladies. You've just demonstrated that we're working the way we should be working. There would be absolutely no interest in helping women. And this is a situation that's, it's so amazing that women can appeal to the very thing that they say doesn't exist in patriarchy, which is care for women. And they can create an entire political movement that's very successful around appealing to the one thing they say doesn't exist in men and patriarchy. And being able to define, they can say that, no, women don't have this power, as they use this power to get what they want. It is beautiful in its darkness and its hypocrisy, and it's not beautiful. Okay, continue.
Okay. Yes, let us continue.
And the only people who think that way are women whose relationships with men have been extraordinarily damaged, or men who have no idea who they are, or who are trying to shirk responsibility. The idea that masculinity in its essence is somehow toxic is an absolutely dreadful idea.
I'm glad I asked you that question. Jordan Peterson.
Final thoughts?
Well, I think okay, so it brings me some hope that Jordan Peterson at least opened the door for this conversation to happen. I hope that people find their way to, you know, some of the answers that you provided. And I'm glad that Tucker Carlson is heading in this way, too, because, you know, I mean, he's got a big platform. So I hope a lot of people saw this, and I hope a lot of people took something away from it. But I think that, you know, that, as you were saying, what I think I hope for is that people will look more into Peterson's other work, because he goes into far more detail exhaustively on this topic, and there's a lot more sympathy towards men. But more so than that, I hope that that eventually leads them down to look at other people's work, you know, on the subject as well, which, you know, if they use YouTube, then inevitably that's what they'll probably find. So, yeah, I mean, and otherwise, is most of the stuff that we've talked about, our opinions out there, I stand firm by those. So,
well, I can only go by what Professor Peterson is saying in this interview. So if he says something different than in another context, then I can't respond to that because it's in another context. I don't know if he would agree with the things that I'm saying. I think that I am saying things that he hasn't said, and he may have not considered. And that is fine. That's the process of evolving your thinking and learning. And nobody on this earth has all the answers. And I would also say, I don't know if Professor Peterson is simply bringing the level that Tucker is currently at. So he's simply going to Tucker's level and expressing things at that level, as opposed to taking it into a different dimension like I would. I know that the things that I talk about can be very challenging and difficult to hear. And to know that there's an aspect of control that women have and should be responsible for is a difficult message in the current landscape, because I think that men are very much interested in these identities of power and absolute control. And it's hard to hear that you don't, something so personal and intimate as your identity might be controlled by someone who isn't you. That's a difficult message, and especially when we're going against the message of ultimate female vulnerability and ultimate male power. Ultimate male power. So it's I know that the stuff I say is oh God. And
R.I.P. headphone users. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, you should have warned people for that. Okay, and so I'm offering these thoughts for what they are, and there you go. If you want to join us in the after show, www.patreon.com. You can also get after shows via Feed the Badger, but it's a little bit more sketchy because Patreon has a great delivery mechanism, and I have not been able to figure out how to replicate it on my own with my own little small business activities or abilities. So if you do want to join us, www.patreon.com/HoneyBadgerRadio. And today's after show, we will be discussing Damn, Destroy a Man Now, which is essentially using women's power to define men's identities as moral in order to destroy them, because why not, right?
Yeah.
Like, why not just punch women? Why not just do that? Why not just use your power over men to destroy them? Isn't it satisfying? Isn't it just really great? That's sarcasm, by the way. But let's pretend that women don't have this power at the same time as we use it to destroy men. That wasn't sarcasm. That was an observation.
No.
Okay.
All right. So before I close it out, I do have one more super chat I should read. So the Spence Fencer gives us $10 and says, that is fucking awesome for Peterson to say. I think he's talking about the last bit about toxic masculinity that we agreed with. This is for you, Alison and crew, because I'm sure it's your work that got this knowledge to him. Let's buy a fucking rocket and put a Keck flag on Mars. Because you know going to Mars is a patriarchal construct, right? So
we're not just gonna put a Keck flag on Mars. We're gonna get out of this fucking solar system. We're gonna blow it, babies. Like babies, whatever. Whatever. We're gonna get out of here. We are going to solve the conundrum of the human race, the human spirit, the human identity, and we are going to make it to another galaxy.
Yeah, and then we're gonna reorganize the stars in the Milky Way to look like Pepe from our new galaxy, so that we always have a view of it.
Exactly.
Yes.
We're going to be that awesome. We're going to skip class 1. We're going to go right to class 3.
Is that like maximum memeage if you do that? Like if you reorganize a galaxy's star pattern so that they make a picture? that seems that's like stuff that God did not want us to tamper with.
Yeah, Pepe's in the fabric of space-time. It was never meant to be, but then maybe it should be. Because it was never meant to be.
Yeah, well, I mean, don't ever tell a honey badger never. Okay,
rip off.
With that said, we should probably roll out. Thanks for joining us on today's HBR Debate. We will have a new stream for you of the same type later in the week. Also, be on the lookout for a stream tonight. I will be streaming, I believe Karen is speaking at Toronto for Cafe, and we'll be streaming it on our channels. So be sure to check that out tonight. I believe it's 7 p.m. Eastern.
Do you believe?
I think I have to look it up. I forget. I know it's 7, but I don't know about the time zone. So I'm 7 in Toronto. I'm pretty sure. So that's 7. That's 6. 7
just
Eastern.
Give me a second. I'll get the just.
Okay. All right. Go ahead.
Just do Doge impressions.
In the meantime, I'll say a few things that people might not be happy with, or maybe they do. So there's a little bit of change my mind. Spider-Man 2 was the best superhero movie. Changed my mind. The Star Wars prequels are going to be better than the movies that are currently coming out. Changed my mind. And I like my coffee with cream but no sugar. So there you go. Allison, did you find it? Okay.
Yes, I did. The Silent Half of Domestic Violence, the University of Toronto, Wednesday, February 28th, which is today, at 7 p.m. One presumes Eastern, since the evil half of Canada, the Torontonians, are in Eastern Standard Time.
Yeah. So what time is it?
It's in Eastern, 7 p.m. 7 p.m.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Engineering Building, room 102, not 2, 102. Mechanical Engineering Building, room 102. So go there and see Karen talk about the silent half of domestic violence. Yeah.
There you go.
If you're part of the evil part of Canada,
Yeah.
The eastern part. Okay, let's go.
So let's go. We're out of here. Thanks again.